Good morning. My name is Nancy Fitz, and I'm the Minor Use Team Leader in the U.S. EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs, or OPP. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to provide you all with an update on EPA's pesticide activities over the past year, although it really seems like way more than a year since Bo Davis and I had the chance to talk with you all near Baltimore last year. I'm going to split the presentation into three approximately equal parts so I can take questions relevant to each segment before changing gears. During the first part, I will be talking about some of the high-profile activities in OPP, including our COVID-19 response and updates on specific chemicals or groups of chemicals. The second part will focus more on the day-to-day activities of the registration division and specifically the minor use team, including our work on crop group rulemakings. And then I will finish up with the third segment by providing an update on the regulation of pesticides on hemp. Just like for all of you, COVID-19 has had a big impact on the Office of Pesticide Programs. We've been working from home for 6 months now, and I'll talk about whether that has impacted our productivity in a few minutes. Right now, I'm going to talk about some of the things OPP has done to respond to COVID-19 to protect Americans. These next 3 slides are taken from a presentation on OPP's COVID-19 response and safe disinfectant use that Anita Pease, the director of OPP's antimicrobial division, will be giving at the ChemWatch Global Conference this week. So for antimicrobials, in addition to the data requirements that apply to all pesticides, these pesticides that are designed to control microbial pests such as viruses and bacteria must have data proving their ability to kill these pests, known as efficacy. The efficacy data must be submitted for review if any of the product's use patterns is classified as human health related. So this creates a problem when there's a new virus like SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19, because there are no efficacy data for the new virus. So several years ago, EPA issued guidance to registrants that set out a 2-step process for making claims against emerging viral pathogens not on EPA-registered disinfectant labels. This guidance was developed exactly for the situation we are facing today. And I'll give you a brief overview of the guidance, which divides viruses into 3 subgroups with varying degrees of resistance to inactivation by disinfection. So the first step in the guidance can be performed prior to any outbreak. And in this step, registrants can submit a request to EPA to control a specific emerging viral pathogen by adding a designated statement to the master label and additional terms to the product registration. And the approved statement that can be added depends on the efficacy data available for the product with respect to viruses in the 3 subgroups. The second step occurs during a human or animal disease outbreak caused by an emerging virus that is designated by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, or the World Organization for Animal Health. In this stage, registrants of products with the previously mentioned label amendment and terms of registration are allowed to use the designated statement in off-label communications under certain circumstances intended to inform the user community and public that the disinfectant product can be used against the specific emerging viral pathogen. In early March, EPA posted List N, disinfectants for use against SARS-CoV-2. The initial list contained about 90 products, which shows that plenty of products had gone through step 1 prior to 2020. On the other hand, the most current List N includes close to 500 products, so a big increase over the past few months. EPA expects the products on List N to kill SARS-CoV-2 because they meet one of several criteria. First, they demonstrate efficacy against a pathogen that is harder to kill than SARS-CoV-2, or they demonstrate efficacy against a different human coronavirus that is similar to SARS-CoV-2. So those were the one criteria that were met by the products that were initially listed. Or several months ago, there have been products added or that were already on the list that have demonstrated efficacy against the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. So while that efficacy data was not available at the beginning of the pandemic, they have been tested. Some products have been tested now, and if so, they can make that claim. OPP has made significant improvements to this list over time, including adding information helpful to end users and the ability to search and sort, and most recently by deploying it as a new app-based tool. The goal of the app is that someone who's standing in a store can search the list on their phone to determine if a specific disinfectant on the shelf is on list N. In addition, we regularly update the website with technical information for registrants of antimicrobial products. I'd like to take about 30 seconds here for a quick public service announcement. This is in case you receive questions about what to do, since you're people that are familiar with pesticides. So the infographic on the right is on EPA's website at the link at the bottom of the page, and it's intended to provide basic information for people to follow to protect themselves from SARS-CoV-2. So first, it includes instructions for how to determine if the product is on list N by identifying the EPA registration number of the product and going to list N. Second, stressing the importance of reading and following the label instructions, which you all know well. Third, to pre-clean the surface with soap and water if the label mentions pre-cleaning or if the surface is visibly dirty. It reinforces the importance of following the contact time in the use directions, and the surface should remain wet the whole time of that contact time to ensure the product is effective. Then finally, there are steps for protecting yourself when you're applying it and for storing the product out of reach of children. Okay, switching gears, there has been a lot going on in registration review this year. I'll mention some of the higher profile chemicals and groups of chemicals in the next few slides. In late January, OPP announced the completion of registration review of glyphosate, and we issued the interim decision. After a thorough review of the best available science, EPA concluded that there are no risks of concern to human health when glyphosate is used according to the label, and that glyphosate is not likely to be a carcinogen. These findings on human health risk are consistent with the conclusions of science review by many other countries and other federal agencies. The interim decision includes mitigation, including management measures on glyphosate release height, wind speed, and droplet size to address pesticide spray drift, and updated label language to protect pollinators. The interim decision also requires measures to prevent or reduce weed resistance, which include giving farmers better information on mode of action, the need for scouting, and how to report potential weed resistance issues. There's been a lot of movement on pyrethrins and pyrethroids since last year's food use workshop. And specifically, in November of last year, EPA issued several documents for public comment. These included the ecological risk mitigation proposals for 23 chemicals, proposed interim decisions for 5 chemicals, and the agency's reevaluation of the FQPA safety factor for pyrethroids, where EPA reviewed newly available scientific literature and studies on pyrethroid pesticides, and we found that the science demonstrates that the FQPA safety factor can be reduced from 3x to 1x and still be protective of infants and children. This has some impacts for the risk cup for some of these chemicals. EPA plans to publish proposed interim decisions for the remaining pyrethroids in 2020. And as an example, the proposed interim decision for cypermethrin was issued on September 2nd. So I will talk more about the stoplight analysis in the second segment of this presentation, but I do want to mention the results of this year's stoplight as I go through these high-profile chemicals. The projects involving pyrethrins or pyrethroids in this year's stoplight analysis received a yellow light. A yellow light means that there are some risks that could impact our ability to register the use and establish the corresponding tolerance. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. I also want to mention that in this category, OPP approved a new regional use and tolerance for the use of permethrin on grape and small vine climbing fruit except fuzzy kiwi fruit in subgroup 13-07F this year. And that action also included some crop group expansions and crop group conversions. This slide shows that there's been a lot of work done on imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, clothianidin, and dinotefuran over the past decade. We've issued multiple assessments for review and comment, including benefits assessments, preliminary pollinator assessments, and draft human health risk assessments. And several years ago, we received new pollinator toxicity and exposure data. The pollinator assessments and draft ecological risk assessments noted some risks. And in late January, EPA issued proposed interim decisions for those 4 chemicals and acetamiprid, which propose some mitigation to reduce potential ecological risks, particularly to pollinators and to protect public health. The comment period for those ran through February and March, and then due to the COVID-19 situation was reopened for 30 more days in May and June. The proposed mitigation includes some management measures to keep pesticides on the intended target and to reduce the amount used on crops associated with potential ecological risks, requiring the use of additional personal protective equipment to address some potential occupational risks, restrictions on when pesticides can be applied to blooming crops in order to limit exposure to bees, label language that advises homeowners not to use neonicotinoid products, and canceling the spray uses of imidacloprid on residential turf due to health concerns. So we're reviewing those comments and working on the interim decisions for those chemicals. Potential projects for the 4 chemicals noted on the previous page, the clothianidin, dinotefuran, imidacloprid, and thiamethoxam, received red lights, which means we cannot move forward on those right now, and that means that IR4 removed them from the list provided for prioritization or nomination. At this point, the expansion of the uses for those 4 chemicals is on hold. On the other hand, the projects with acetamiprid received a green light, and we approved uses and set tolerances this year for acetamiprid on the commodities in tropical and subtropical fruit subgroup 24B, and some crop group expansions and crop group conversions. So we were able to move forward on that action. Now for a quick update on dicamba. On June 3rd of this year, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued an order vacating the registrations of the 3 over-the-top dicamba products. Several days later, EPA issued a cancellation order that outlined limited and specific circumstances under which existing stocks of those 3 dicamba products could be used. And that order included the last use date for the vacated products as July 31st of 2020. EPA is currently evaluating the next steps and is in active discussions with registrants and stakeholders. The input from growers of minor crops is very important to us. And if you have input that you would like to share, please contact me. My email address and phone number will be on the last slide of this presentation. Or if you prefer to go through IR4, I know Dan Kunkel has been involved in discussions about dicamba, and I'm volunteering him to talk with you and pass along your input. And then lastly, for this section, not much has changed on the regulatory status of antibiotics since last year's workshop. I'll note that there was a kasugamycin project on potato in this year's stoplight analysis. We assigned an orange to that project because antimicrobial new uses take longer, because there's more work involved and extra steps, including an analysis regarding resistance, consultation with our federal partners, and additional public comment opportunities. Also, I'd add for that specific one that we need more information about it to meet the IR4 public interest finding, because potato is not a minor crop. Okay, I'm going to pause now, and we'll stop and see if anybody has questions about anything that I've talked about so far. This next segment is going to cover things a little closer to home for me, including the registration division in general, and then the activities that the minor use team has been working on this year. I'll start with the accomplishments of the registration division. And this slide provides our accomplishments so far this fiscal year, which runs from October 1st through September 30th, so the numbers will go up a bit by the end of the year. The good news is that these are the same or even a little higher than last year, despite us working from home for 6 months. To give a few examples, the number of new active ingredients registered each year was the same at 5. Last year at this point, we had registered 156 new uses compared to 162 this year, and had completed 601 fast track label amendments compared to 639 so far this year. The one exception is that the number of emergency use exemptions, or Section 18s, is lower this year at 68 compared to 108 at this point last year. But this is actually good news, because many of the Section 18s issued last year were not necessary in 2020 because Section 3 products had been registered. This slide reinforces the same point, basically that the registration division has been able to maintain or even increase productivity in many areas compared to last year. In this graph, the blue lines are the results from last year. The orange lines are the results through early July, and the gray are the projected results for the end of year this year. So I know you can't see the details of what they are, but the point is we're doing a good job compared to last year. And while we do need to account for the shutdown time lost from last year, we're pretty proud of these results. It's a testament to our information technology staff, who made sure we could connect to our databases from home, and that we could all be on email and our calendars at the same time, and the staff and managers who moved full speed ahead throughout a lot of stress, uncertainty, and many of them juggling multiple responsibilities. And this is just a shout out to parents who have young kids at home. More power to you. I don't know how you guys are keeping things afloat. The minor use team has had some changes in personnel this year. Sydney Jackson, a longtime minor use stalwart who attended last year's food use workshop with me, retired at the end of December and is enjoying his retirement. And Bo Davis, our permanent branch chief, has had some health issues and has been doing a different job for much of the year, giving him a chance to focus on his health. In his absence, Dan Rosenblatt has filled in part of the time as our branch chief, as has Laura Bacon, who many of you know and worked with in the past, is Laura Nolan on minor use issues. Laura just completed a 4-month detail as our acting branch chief. Dan and Laura know our work well and have been able to provide a lot of support to us throughout the year. I'm happy to report that the minor use team has also managed to maintain our productivity this year. So far, we've completed work on 25 IR4 petitions covering 125 minor uses, where for the purposes of this use is a new tolerance or a crop group expansion. And we have one more petition in the works with a September 21st PREA date that we expect to complete. So that puts us in pretty much the same place as last year, where we completed 26 IR4 petitions covering 130 minor uses. We also drafted and published 7 tolerance rules for other branches in the registration division, which frees up staff in those branches to work on new active ingredients, label amendments, and other work that's piled up for them. We also had a very productive year working with our friends in the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, or PMRA, including Andrea Martin, Jennifer Selwyn, and others. The rules that we published this year included 5 joint reviews and 10 work shares with PMRA, which is a large percentage of our action and significantly more than the past few years. In addition, there were 2 work shares with California, and we worked closely with IR4 to reinvigorate our minor use coordination with the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, which we're pretty excited about as well. I want to take a few minutes to review how and why the PREA fees are waived for IR4 petitions. This is important because it saves a lot of money. As an example, the cost of an additional food use under PREA is more than $83,000. The PREA, so if you consider the 125 new uses registered this year for IR4 uses, that's a total of over $1 million. So the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, or PREA, includes certain conditions that must be met for IR4. And specifically, PREA states that an application is exempt if EPA determines that the application is solely associated with a tolerance petition submitted in connection with IR4, and an exemption from registration service fees is in the public interest. This slide describes EPA's policy for what being in the public interest means, and I'll go through them individually, but an IR4 application will be presumed to be in the public interest if it is for a biopesticide or if the 4 following criteria are met. First, the data submitted have been developed by IR4. 2, the active ingredient is registered for the active ingredient is already registered for use on a food commodity. This is because the cost for a first food use is about 4 times the cost of a new use, because there's a lot more data which probably would not be developed by IR4, and the work and risk assessments need to be done. So the 3rd criteria listed here is that the active ingredient crop combination has been pre-screened by EPA prior to the food use workshop, and EPA has discussed risk concerns that might hinder registration or the establishment of a tolerance with IR4. This is the red light, green light analysis, or the stoplight analysis that I've mentioned a few times and you've probably heard about. There are a few things I want to point out about this stoplight analysis. First, it takes a lot of work. We involve the branch chiefs from 4 divisions and upper management across OPP. So it is a significant undertaking. Second, IR4 provides us a list of potential projects in early July, which is before the deadline. I do encourage you to submit your projects requests by then, so sort of think of it by the 4th of July, so they can go through the stoplight analysis as it is designed to operate, and so the project is screened before this workshop. We do a catch-up, a smaller version after the prioritization takes place, but it's possible that something could be prioritized, and if it didn't go through the stoplight analysis, it might get cut out at the last minute, which leaves IR4 scrambling. So another point is that the colors that are assigned are meaningful. So the colors are really our way to, quote unquote, discuss risk concerns that might hinder registration. So the colors that we assign, red means that there are significant risks or unknowns that would prevent us from being able to register the use or establish the corresponding tolerance. IR4 removes these from the list that are sent for nomination. And as I mentioned, most of the neonics fit into this category for this year. Orange means that there are significant risks that could impact our ability to register the use, but it's not quite red, or that there are additional steps and processes that need to be done that will likely slow down the registration and the establishment of the corresponding tolerances. Antibiotics fit into this category, and some other projects that were designated as orange in this year's stoplight analysis include Captan on aronia berry, Flumetron on sesame, and natamycin for post-harvest use on citrus. Yellow means that there are some risks that could impact our ability to register the use. This could be due to any of a number of factors, including ongoing work and registration review, the need for additional data, there are ecological risks that need to be mitigated, or that we might be getting close to the risk cup for dietary and/or aggregate exposure. As I mentioned earlier, the pyrethroids and pyrethrins are an example of this. So green means that there are no risks that would impact our ability to register the use and establish the corresponding tolerances. In the past few food use workshops, I haven't seen the colors make much of a difference in determining the projects that have been prioritized. I do encourage you all to take a closer look at that information as you work your way through the prioritization this year. If you prioritize a project that is designated as orange, there is a chance that the project won't see the light of day and/or that it'll be significantly delayed. Similarly, you're rolling the dice a little bit and taking a chance with projects designated as yellow. Sometimes things work out and we can move forward, but sometimes they don't. And then one final caveat is that even if, projects that are designated as green, I can't guarantee that those will sail through the process without any problems. They do have a much better chance, but the stoplight is a snapshot in time, and sometimes things change as reviews are done or we realize that additional data are needed. Then the last factor here in the straightforward public interest finding is that the use is for a minor crop, which is used on less than or equal to 300,000 acres, or a specialty crop, or there are some other criteria, like it's on a major crop that is a representative commodity for a crop group or subgroup that's being submitted to establish tolerances for the minor uses, or some other things. It's possible for us to make a case-by-case determination of the public interest finding if things don't fit these 4 criteria, but that takes a little bit more work and has to go through multiple meetings and management briefings. So it's definitely easier for me personally to make the determination that these are in the public interest if they meet these 4 criteria. The other half of our branch is the emergency response team, and a big part of their work is to respond to Section 18 emergency exemption applications from state and federal agencies. Unregistered pesticide uses are temporarily allowed when urgent and non-routine pest management situations result in emergency conditions. The emergency response team coordinates with others in OPP to confirm that an emergency condition exists and that the required safety findings can be made for the use. Last year, the need for 40 Section 18s was eliminated by establishing Section 3 registrations, including about 30 covering sulfoxaflor on cotton, sorghum, and strawberry. So that's part of why the number of Section 18s that we've issued is down this year, a big part. There is a close relationship between many Section 18s and minor uses in IR4. This slide shows several examples of current Section 18 registrations on fruit and mint. Also, IR4 petitions often establish Section 3 uses that eliminate the need for Section 18s. One significant change for the emergency response team this year has been an increase in the number of requests for Section 18s for antimicrobial pesticides. There were several requested by federal agencies in the first half of this year, but there's been an exponential increase in the number of inquiries about Section 18s for the use of antimicrobial pesticides to address COVID-19. And just a few weeks ago, EPA issued a Section 18 to the state of Texas, permitting Texas to allow American Airlines and Total Orthopedic Sport and Spine to use a new product that kills coronavirus like the SARS-CoV-2 virus on surfaces for up to 7 days. The last topic I want to cover in this segment is to provide an update on crop group rulemakings. First, the herbs and spices rulemaking had been proposed just before last year's food use workshop, and the comment period was open during last year. We received 8 comments on the rule, including 3 that were very detailed and extensive. We reviewed those comments carefully and adjusted the herbs and spices crop group regulation as needed. This shows what was in the proposal. I can't talk about the contents of the final rule yet because it's still internal. But the final herbs and spices rule is being reviewed and is expected to publish shortly. I'm also happy to report that OPP has gained a lot of experience with this rulemaking, including me and the rule writers in the Field and External Affairs Division. And we are beginning to plan for phases 6 and 7 of the crop group rulemaking. And by doing that, we're ready to take advantage of the great work that IR4 did in submitting the petitions submitted for crop groups 1 and 2 on root and tuber vegetables and their leaves, crop groups 6 and 7, the legume vegetables and their foliage, crop groups 15 and 16 for cereal grains and their forage, fodder, and straw, as well as crop groups 17 and 18 for grass forage, fodder and hay, and non-grass animal feeds. We're still working through the order and the timing, but we do plan to start on phase 6 when phase 5 is published. So this is the end of segment 2. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about these topics now. The last part of my presentation will be discussing hemp, and specifically the use and registration of pesticides for use on hemp. These slides are about a third of the presentation that Christine Olinger gave as part of the American Chemistry Society virtual meeting about a month ago. Chris is a branch chief in OPP's Health Effects Division and is heading a work group in that division to work out some of the chemistry, occupational exposure, and risk assessment challenges with registering pesticides for use on hemp, if tolerances and risk assessments are needed. Much of what I will be discussing reflects the work of Chris and her work group, as well as their collaboration with IR4. A reasonable starting point for this discussion is with the Farm Bill as it was reenacted in 2018. The 2018 Farm Bill included provisions that removed hemp from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, which set the stage for growers who wanted to grow hemp. That Farm Bill also created some work for federal agencies to implement the hemp provisions, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, and EPA. Obviously, I'm going to be focusing on EPA's work. I will be using the term hemp as defined in the Farm Bill, which is the plant cannabis sativa that contains THC at a concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. Cannabis with a THC concentration greater than that is marijuana, which is classified as a Schedule 1 drug in the Controlled Substances Act and is not legal federally. So this discussion regarding the use of pesticides, setting tolerances, and risk assessment is limited to hemp as defined in the Farm Bill. The hemp plant has many uses, including fiber, hemp seed for oil and protein, and consumer products that contain CBD. In 2018, FDA issued a determination that hulled hemp seed and the processed commodities from hemp seed, which includes protein powder and hemp seed oil, are generally recognized as safe or GRAS for use in food. FDA is still determining how to regulate other cannabis-derived products such as CBD oil. This is relevant to our work because EPA establishes tolerances for use on food and feed commodities. So at this point, only hemp seed and its processed commodities are clearly designated as food, and thus are the raw agricultural commodities that could have tolerances established. This may change over time, but reflects the current state of regulatory agency decisions. As you know, EPA is responsible for registering pesticides and for setting tolerances on human foods and animal feeds. When Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill, there were very few options available to hemp growers for dealing with pest pressures. By July of last year, we had received 10 applications under FIFRA for uses of pesticides on hemp. Since this is a new crop, we sought comment in the Federal Register, and after reviewing those comments and completing the registration process, at the end of 2019, EPA approved adding hemp to the use sites of 10 pesticides. 9 of those were biopesticides, and 1 was a conventional pesticide. Since then, hemp has been added as a use to more than 20 additional biocide products. So far, the active ingredients in all of these products have been exempt from the requirement for tolerances. And in some situations, EPA can establish an exemption from the requirement of a tolerance for a food use instead of establishing a tolerance, especially when there is no concern about the hazard from the use of that pesticide. We do have a web page on OPP's website that is kept up to date with the pesticides registered for use on hemp. I encourage you to keep an eye on it because it's updated as we register the use of hemp on additional products. From the EPA pesticides webpage, if you search for hemp, you can get right to that site. The next few slides discuss what we have been thinking about for the data that might be required to support the use of a conventional pesticide on hemp, as well as any needed human health risk assessments. And in this sense, I'm talking about conventional pesticides that do require tolerances, do require risk assessments before we can establish the tolerance and add the use to the label. We have not published data requirements for the use of pesticides on hemp and have no immediate plans to do so. We want to see how the hemp market matures over the next few years before doing that. In the meantime, we are working through things on a case-by-case basis and encourage registrants to come in and talk with us as they plan to get into this area if they are considering adding hemp to their pesticide registrations. So what are we thinking about in terms of potential data requirements? It includes data that are used to establish tolerances, such as crop field trials and processing studies, which is what I'll focus on since these are IR4's bread and butter. But it also includes data such as dislodgeable foliar residue studies for occupational assessments. I'm not going to spend much time on the human health risk assessment side of things, but the Health Effects Division work group is looking into how will we do a human health risk assessment for a conventional pesticide when we get a petition? How do we look at applicator and worker exposure for potentially new scenarios? How do we assess the dietary exposure? How do we assess other exposures to hemp products, and what should we include? So there are a lot of hard questions here, but I'm very impressed by the group that's working on it, and am confident that they will come up with some good solutions. If you have any information about hemp consumption, whether hemp is used as animal feed or anything that might help us answer some of these exposure assessments, please get in contact with me. I want to give a big shout out to IR4 for all of the work that they've done on the data requirement front for hemp. They truly are trailblazers in this area. So a big thanks to Ken, Debbie, Jerry, Dan, Matt, and others across the country who are working on hemp studies and help develop the program. EPA is collaborating with IR4 industry as well as our counterparts in Canada to help identify practical options for the data needed to evaluate pesticide registrations on hemp. PMRA in Canada has approved several tolerances for hemp seed already, so we are trying to learn as much as we can from them and their experience. I'll get into this in a little bit more detail in the next few slides, but we are applying the existing concepts in our guidelines and guidance in terms of determining number of field trials and regional distribution of the trials. EPA uses crop residue studies to determine the maximum residue levels of a pesticide and its major metabolites in raw agricultural commodities from the legal labeled use of the pesticide. The commodities collected include any plant parts that would be used for human food or livestock feed. OCSPP test guideline 860.1500 identifies the number and location of field trials depending on crop acreage and significance in the human diet. The test guideline also has a map of growing regions for determining the locations of the trials, so they're representative of the uses across the U.S. We also use processing studies to determine whether residues of a pesticide and metabolites of concern concentrate when the raw commodity is processed into commodities used for human food or animal feed. So hemp residue studies may be needed to support a petition for a new use of a pesticide on hemp. Specifically, we would be considering petitions for tolerances for hemp seed and its processed products, as I mentioned earlier, because FDA has determined that those parts of the hemp plant may be safely used in human food. We will be evaluating proposed protocols using the criteria in the test guidelines 860.1500 and specifically in attachment 7 when considering the number and location of field trials. Processing studies may be required but we would consider bridging studies from other crops if the processing of hemp is similar to the processing of the other crop. And just want to mention that IR4 did develop a protocol for conducting residue studies on hemp that we reviewed last year using these criteria, and IR4 received our thumbs up to proceed. EPA is very open to proposals for bridging residue studies from similar crops that are already registered to hemp, assuming that the proposed use is substantially similar. We are considering these on a case-by-case basis. We have had many internal and external discussions, including with IR4, about what crops are appropriate for bridging to hemp. This is complicated because different parts of the hemp plant are used for different products. So what's appropriate for bridging to the fiber is different than what's appropriate for bridging to the hemp seed, and which is different from bridging to CBD oil if we get to the point of establishing tolerances for that at some point in the future. So in summary, EPA is eager to work with registrants and other stakeholders on the potential use of conventional pesticides on hemp, so hemp growers will have more options and more tools available to deal with their pest pressures. We are taking a flexible approach and are considering proposals for data requirements or data bridging on a case-by-case basis. And registrants are strongly encouraged to come talk with us before they start their data development process or data translation proposals to ensure that the package will meet our needs and can be reviewed in a timely manner. We did notice that there were quite a few potential projects for hemp included in this year's stoplight analysis, and I look forward to watching the prioritization process and seeing how things work out. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions about hemp or anything else that I've discussed. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the workshop.